The autumn leaves drifted down outside Oak Ridge Elementary School as 10-year-old Lily Thompson sat at her desk, absent-mindedly touching one of her intricate braids. Her mother had spent 3 hours on Sunday afternoon working on them, each twist and turn a testament to love and heritage. The classroom was unnaturally quiet as Ms. Prescott, a woman whose 20 years at the school had calcified her methods rather than refined them, walked between the rows of desks, checking homework assignments with sharp, disapproving clicks of her tongue. Lily felt the teacher's shadow fall across her paper before she saw her. There was something in the way Miss Prescott's breath caught that made Lily's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Those braids," Miss Prescott said, her voice cutting through the silence. "They're quite distracting, don't you think?" Before Lily could respond, before she could even process what was happening, Ms. Prescott had opened her desk drawer and removed a pair of scissors. The metallic snick as they opened sent a chill through Lily's body. "I think," Ms. Prescott continued, her voice carrying a false sweetness that made several students look up in alarm, "that they don't really suit you. Not with your build. Let's fix that, shall we?" Time seemed to slow as Ms. Prescott's hand moved toward Lily's head. The first cut came with a sound that would echo in Lily's nightmares for months, the cruel slicing of metal through her carefully crafted braids. Chunks of hair fell to the desk, to the floor. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she remained frozen, unable to speak or move as the teacher methodically destroyed what her mother had created with such care. "There," Ms. Prescott finally said, stepping back to admire her work. Much less distracting now. The classroom remained in shocked silence. Not a single child spoke. Not a single child moved. And Lily, her fingers trembling as they touched the jagged remains of her hair, felt something inside her shatter. If you've ever witnessed an injustice that left you speechless, that made your heart race with anger and sorrow, take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Stories like Lily's deserve to be heard, and your support helps ensure they reach others who need to hear them. Margaret Reynolds closed the front door behind her and hung her coat on the rack, the familiar motion a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. At 53, she had learned to weather life's storms with quiet dignity, a skill she'd cultivated through decades of subtle slights and unmistakable barriers. Today, though, as the school secretary, she had witnessed something that made her hands shake with a rage she hadn't felt in years. The kitchen was warm and smelled of the soup she'd left simmering in the slow cooker that morning. Margaret moved automatically, setting her purse on the counter and removing her sensible shoes. But her mind remained in that classroom, watching as a child's dignity was stripped away in front of her peers. She hadn't intervened. She had stood in the doorway, document in hand, and frozen in disbelief. "I should have said something," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "I should have stopped her." Margaret's reflection in the microwave door showed a woman of medium height with rich brown skin, etched with the lines of a life fully lived. Her eyes, normally warm and observant, now held a storm of conflicting emotions. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized her strong cheekbones and determined chin. She had never considered herself beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was an undeniable strength in her features, a resilience forged through years of being the only black administrator in a predominantly white school. She moved to the living room, where photographs chronicled her life. Her late husband smiling beside her at their wedding, her son in his graduation cap and gown, her parents standing proudly in front of their first home. It was the oldest photo that drew her now, her grandmother Beatrice, sitting ramrod straight in her Sunday best, her expression one of unwavering dignity, despite living in a time when dignity was something black women had to fight for daily. "What would you have done, Grandma?" Margaret whispered, tracing the frame with her fingertip. The answer came in a memory of her grandmother's voice. "When you can't find your courage, borrow it from those who came before you." Margaret reached for her phone. She had failed to act in the moment, but perhaps it wasn't too late to do what was right. Have you ever witnessed someone being mistreated and regretted not speaking up? Share your experience in the comments below. What stopped you and what would you do differently now? The phone call David Thompson received that afternoon was brief, but enough to send his heart racing. The school administrator's voice had been carefully neutral, explaining that there had been an incident involving his daughter, and could he please come to the school as soon as possible. When David asked to speak with Lily, the pause that followed told him everything he needed to know. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said. already reaching for his keys. The drive to Oak Ridge Elementary was a blur of autumn colors and racing thoughts. David had chosen this small town specifically for its quiet atmosphere and good schools, a place where Lily could heal after losing her mother to cancer 2 years earlier. His decision to take extended leave from the FBI had raised eyebrows among his colleagues, but Lily's well-being had been worth any career setback. As he pulled into the school parking lot, David felt himself automatically shifting into agent mode, observing, assessing, preparing for confrontation. It was a mindset that had served him well in the field, allowing him to remain calm in the most volatile situations. Yet nothing in his training had prepared him for the sight of his daughter sitting outside the principal's office. Her beautiful braids, the ones Anna had taught him how to create before she died, crudely hacked away, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. David felt something primal rise within him, a father's rage, burning hot and demanding action. But years of training held him steady as he knelt before Lily, gently tilting her chin up. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, his heart breaking at the shame and hurt in her eyes. "I'm here now." Lily launched herself into his arms, her tears soaking into his shirt. "She said I was too fat for braids, Daddy," she whispered. "She said they didn't suit me." David held his daughter tighter, sheltering her from the curious stares of passing students and staff. In that moment, he made a silent promise. This would not stand. Not here, not to his child, not to any child. When Principal Harriet Green finally called them into her office, David noticed the discomfort in her posture immediately. The slightly too straight back, the hands clasped too tightly on the desk. Ms. Prescott sat beside her, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes defiant. "Mr. Thompson," Principal Green began, her voice professionally detached. "I understand you're upset." "Upset doesn't begin to cover it," David interrupted, his tone controlled but leaving no room for dismissal. "I want to understand exactly what happened here, and I want to know what actions the school will be taking." Principal Green cleared her throat. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Ms. Prescott was attempting to implement a lesson about classroom distraction and personal presentation. I was teaching the child about appropriate appearances," Ms. Prescott cut in, her chin raised. "Those braids were excessive and drawing attention away from schoolwork. It was a teaching moment about the importance of modesty." David felt Lily shrink beside him, and something in him hardened. He turned to face Ms. Prescott directly. "You cut my daughter's hair without permission. You humiliated her in front of her peers. You made comments about her body that no adult should ever make to a child. This wasn't education, it was assault." Ms. Prescott's face flushed. "That's completely absurd. I've been teaching for 20 years, and sometimes children need firm guidance." "What my daughter needs," David said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is to be treated with dignity and respect. What she doesn't need is an adult with scissors and prejudice deciding what her body should look like." Principal Green intervened, her discomfort now palpable. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you we take this seriously, but perhaps we can handle this as an internal disciplinary matter." "No," David said simply. "This isn't going to be swept under the rug. I'll be requesting the security camera footage from today. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the school board. And I'll be consulting with a lawyer about assault charges." The silence that followed was broken by a soft knock at the door. Margaret Reynolds entered, a folder in her hand and determination in her eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, though her expression suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But I thought you should see this before the meeting concludes." She placed a document on the principal's desk, a disciplinary report dated that morning, written by Ms. Prescott claiming that Lily had been disruptive and defiant during class. "This was filed before the incident," Margaret explained, meeting David's eyes briefly. "I believe Ms. Prescott was attempting to create a paper trail to justify her actions." The principal's face paled as she read the report. Ms. Prescott began to sputter explanations, but David was no longer listening. He turned to Margaret, recognition and gratitude in his eyes. In that moment, an alliance was formed, not with dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but with the simple acknowledgement that sometimes standing for what's right requires nothing more than telling the truth. If you're finding value in this story of courage in the face of injustice, please take a moment to subscribe. Each subscription helps support more content that highlights the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The kitchen in David's modest two-story home had become a sanctuary of sorts over the past 2 years. After Anna's death, he had taught himself to cook properly, not just the bachelor basics he'd relied on during his years in the field, but real meals that nourished both body and spirit. Tonight he moved through the familiar routine of dinner preparation, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables providing a counterpoint to the thoughts racing through his mind. Lily sat at the kitchen island, a sketchbook open before her. Drawing had become her refuge in the months after losing her mother, and David recognized the therapeutic value of creating something beautiful when the world seemed determined to take beauty away. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, sliding diced onions into a sizzling pan. Lily's pencil paused on the paper. "Everyone's going to stare at me tomorrow." The simple statement carried the weight of a child's worst fear, being different, being marked, being the center of unwanted attention. David set down his knife and moved to sit beside her. "You don't have to go back tomorrow if you're not ready," he said gently. "We can take some time." Lily looked up at him, her eyes carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "But she wins then, doesn't she? If I hide..." David felt a surge of pride so intense, it nearly brought tears to his eyes. Even in her pain, his daughter understood something fundamental about dignity, that sometimes simply showing up was an act of courage. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that maybe we could write something together. A letter to the school, to the community. Not to attack anyone, but to tell the truth about what happened." "Would people listen?" Lily asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "Some would," David answered honestly. "Not everyone, but the right ones might." After dinner, they sat together at the dining room table with a blank document open on David's laptop. The words came slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. They wrote about respect and boundaries, about the sacred trust between educators and students, about the impact of public humiliation on a developing sense of self. They wrote about hair as a connection to identity and culture, about bodies as deserving of dignity, regardless of size or shape. When they finished, David read it aloud, watching Lily's face for her reaction. "What do you think? Should we share it?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently touching the uneven ends of her hair. "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she finally admitted. "What if people are mean about it?" David recognized the fear in her voice. It was the same fear he'd heard in witnesses preparing to testify, in colleagues about to enter dangerous situations. It was the natural human response to vulnerability. "Courage isn't about not being afraid," he told her, echoing words his own father had once shared. "It's about doing what matters, even when you are afraid." Lily considered this, then nodded slowly. "Can we think about it more tomorrow?" "Absolutely," David assured her. "There's no rush." Later that night, as David stood in the doorway of Lily's bedroom, watching her finally sleep after hours of restlessness, his phone vibrated with a message. It was from Margaret Reynolds, the school secretary, who had intervened earlier that day. "Mr. Thompson, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I couldn't stop thinking about your daughter. There's a friend of mine, Elaine Carter, who runs a beauty salon in town. She specializes in natural hair and has helped many young girls in difficult situations. If Lily would be comfortable, Elaine might be able to help with her hair. No pressure, just thought I'd offer. Regardless, I want you to know you're not alone in this fight." David felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of isolation he hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to unravel. In the morning, he would show the message to Lily and let her decide. For now, he took comfort in the reminder that even in the smallest towns, allies could be found in unexpected places. Have you ever had someone unexpectedly stand up for you or offer help when you needed it most? How did it change your situation? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone who needs hope today. The Belle's Beauty Salon storefront was modest, a small space nestled between a hardware store and a family-owned bakery on Main Street. The bell above the door jingled softly as David and Lily entered, the sound sending a visible wave of anxiety through Lily's shoulders. She had agreed to come, but her reluctance was evident in every hesitant step. Elaine Carter looked up from the reception desk, her warm smile creating immediate crinkles around her eyes. At 67, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had seen enough of life to know what mattered and what didn't. "You must be the Thompsons," she said, moving around the desk to greet them properly. She was a statuesque woman with silver locks that cascaded down her back, wearing a vibrant purple tunic that seemed to float around her as she moved. Margaret called ahead. "I'm Elaine." David felt Lily press closer to his side as Elaine knelt to her level, not with the condescending air adults often adopted with children, but with the simple respect of one person meeting another. "I heard you had a rough day yesterday," Elaine said gently. "Would you mind if I took a look at your hair just to see what we're working with?" After a moment's hesitation, Lily nodded. Elaine's practiced fingers moved carefully through what remained of the braids, her expression professional but with an underlying current of indignation that told David she understood exactly what had happened. "Well," Elaine said finally, straightening up, "we have options. We can try to even things out with a shorter style, or we could look at some protective styles that might work with what we have. What matters is what would make you feel good." Lily glanced up at David, uncertainty in her eyes. He nodded encouragingly. "It's completely up to you, sweetheart. Lily began hesitantly, "Could you just make it look normal again, so people don't stare?" A shadow passed over Elaine's face, brief but unmistakable. "I can definitely help with that," she said. "But first, would you humor an old woman and come see something?" She led them to the back of the salon, where a wall was covered with photographs. Women and girls of all ages with various natural hairstyles, all beaming at the camera. "Every one of these beautiful people came to me at some point feeling like something was wrong with their hair," Elaine explained. "Some because people had told them so directly, others because the world had whispered it to them in 1,000 small ways." Lily studied the photos, her eyes widening at the variety and beauty displayed. "Your hair is part of your crown," Elaine continued, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality that suggested she'd shared this wisdom many times before. "And no one has the right to take that from you. What happened wasn't about your hair being wrong, it was about someone else's heart being wrong." David watched as his daughter absorbed these words, standing a little straighter as she continued to look at the photographs. In this moment, he recognized something his FBI training had taught him about trauma and healing. Sometimes, the most powerful recovery came not from erasing the wound, but from reframing the story around it. As Elaine worked on Lily's hair, the salon gradually filled with other clients. To David's surprise, several seemed to know exactly who Lily was, offering quiet words of support and sharing stories of their own experiences with boundary violations and reclaimed dignity. Ruth Johnston, a retired teacher from the neighboring district, sat under a dryer and leaned forward to speak with David. "I taught alongside Diane Prescott for 5 years before I couldn't take it anymore," she confided, her voice low but intense. "What she did to your daughter isn't new behavior. It's just the first time someone's called her on it publicly." By the time Elaine finished, Lily's hair had been transformed into a neat, chin-length style that framed her face beautifully. But more importantly, the shame in her eyes had begun to recede, replaced by something cautious but hopeful. "There," Elaine said, turning Lily toward the mirror. "Beautiful, dignified, and entirely your own." On the drive home, Lily was quieter than usual, her fingers occasionally reaching up to touch her new hairstyle. "What are you thinking about?" David asked gently. "Ms. Elaine said something about my crown," Lily replied. "It made me think about what Mom used to say, about how we carry our ancestors in our bones." David felt his throat tighten. Anna had indeed spoken this way, sharing with Lily the heritage and strength of the women who had come before her. It had been months since Lily had mentioned these conversations. "Your mom would be so proud of how you're handling this," he said. Lily looked out the window at the passing scenery. "I think," she said slowly, "I want to share our letter. If this story resonates with you, please hit the subscribe button. Your support helps bring more stories of resilience and dignity to light, showing others they aren't alone in their struggles." The school board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the community room of the local library, a space designed for no more than 50 people, but currently straining to contain nearly twice that number. News of what happened to Lily had spread through the town like wildfire, igniting conversations in coffee shops, at church gatherings, and across backyard fences. Margaret Reynolds sat near the back, her posture perfect, despite the uncomfortable folding chair. She watched as David and Lily entered, noting the way people turned to look, the way whispers followed their progress to the front row. The child's hair had been styled differently, shorter but somehow dignified, and Margaret silently thanked Elaine for her work. The meeting began with standard procedures. Minutes approved, budget matters discussed, a brief debate about the upcoming science fair requirements. The tension in the room grew with each passing agenda item, everyone aware that the real reason for the unusual attendance had not yet been addressed. Finally, Board President Helen Michaels cleared her throat. We now move to public comments. I understand we have several community members who wish to speak regarding an incident at Oak Ridge Elementary last week. David Thompson was the first to approach the microphone. His demeanor was calm but resolute as he introduced himself and briefly outlined what had happened to his daughter. He did not raise his voice. He did not make accusations. He simply stated facts in the measured tones of someone accustomed to giving testimony. My daughter and I have prepared a letter, he concluded, which I've submitted to the board for review. We're not here seeking punishment, but accountability and change. What happened reflects not just one person's actions, but a culture that allowed those actions to seem acceptable. That's what needs to be addressed. As David returned to his seat, a woman Margaret recognized as Cynthia Miller, whose daughter was in the same class as Lily, approached the microphone. I've known Diane Prescott for 15 years, Cynthia began, her voice carrying a defensive edge. She's always maintained high standards and discipline in her classroom. While what happened was perhaps unfortunate, we need to consider that children today often lack the structure and guidance they need. Sometimes firm measures are necessary. Several heads nodded in agreement. Margaret felt her hands clench in her lap. Furthermore, Cynthia continued, gaining confidence, this seems like an isolated incident being blown out of proportion. Do we really need to rethink our entire approach because one child was upset over a haircut? The dismissive characterization hung in the air for a moment before another community member stepped forward. Elaine Carter, her silver locks cascading down her back, her expression serene but determined. My name is Elaine Carter, she began. I've lived in this town for 67 years. I was among the first black students to integrate Oak Ridge when I was a girl in 1968. The room grew quieter. What happened to Lily Thompson wasn't about a haircut, Elaine continued. It was about power and whose bodies are considered acceptable. It was about whose autonomy is respected and whose is violated. I've spent decades fixing the physical damage done when people feel entitled to police black bodies. But I cannot fix the invisible wounds that such violations leave behind. Margaret watched as Elaine's words settled over the room, shifting something in the collective atmosphere. 23 years ago, Elaine said, her voice steady, a teacher at Oak Ridge told my granddaughter that her hair was unprofessional and that she would never succeed if she didn't tame it. I taught my granddaughter that her crown was beautiful exactly as it was, but I never confronted that teacher. I never came to a meeting like this. I told myself it was better to focus on healing my child than fighting a system that seemed immovable. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the board members. I was wrong. My silence allowed what happened to Lily to happen. All our silence did. So I'm not here to defend or condemn Diane Prescott. I'm here to say that this community needs to decide, once and for all, whether we truly believe in the dignity of every child, or just the ones who look and act the way we think they should. As Elaine returned to her seat, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. Margaret felt something long dormant stir within her, the recognition that sometimes history provides second chances to those who failed to act the first time. She rose from her seat and made her way to the microphone. My name is Margaret Reynolds, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I've been the administrative secretary at Oak Ridge Elementary for 18 years. I was present the day Ms. Prescott cut Lily Thompson's hair without permission. She could feel eyes on her, colleagues, neighbors, her supervisor, but she continued. What I witnessed wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was the culmination of a pattern I've observed for years, a pattern I documented and reported through proper channels multiple times. A murmur ran through the crowd. Principal Green shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I have copies of those reports with me tonight, Margaret continued, removing a folder from her bag. Reports that document similar incidents involving other children, predominantly children of color, and children from lower income families. Reports that were consistently filed away without action. As Margaret spoke, she felt a weight lifting, the burden of complicity she had carried for too long. When she returned to her seat, an elderly man she recognized as Mr. Finch, who had taught history at Oak Ridge for over 30 years before retiring, reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. Been waiting a long time for someone to say it out loud, he whispered. Have you ever witnessed a moment when speaking truth changed the energy in a room? What gave you or others the courage to break the silence? Share your experience in the comments below. The days following the school board meeting brought change with the swift decisiveness that small towns sometimes muster when the alternative is to face their own complicity. Principal Green announced her early retirement. Ms. Prescott was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The school board established a committee to review disciplinary practices and cultural competency training for staff. For Lily, however, the victories felt hollow. Despite her new hairstyle and her father's unwavering support, returning to school had been an exercise in endurance. Some classmates whispered behind her back. Others avoided her altogether, as though what happened was somehow contagious. Her teacher's desk remained occupied by a substitute who was painfully careful around her, creating a different kind of isolation. "I just want things to be normal again," she confessed to her father one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the last of the autumn leaves drift from the oak tree in their front yard. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a cost. But I promise you it won't always feel this hard." The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived at their door, Helen Garza, the local reporter for the Pine Grove Gazette. David initially hesitated to let her in, protective of Lily's privacy, but Helen's approach was different from what he'd expected. "I'm not here to sensationalize what happened," she explained as they sat in the living room, Lily listening cautiously from the staircase. "I'm here because what happened to your daughter speaks to larger issues in our schools and community, issues that deserve thoughtful coverage." David studied her, the earnest expression, the notebook already filled with research, the careful way she framed her questions. As an FBI agent, he'd developed a keen sense for people's motivations, and Helen's seemed genuine. "What exactly did you have in mind?" he asked. "An in-depth piece," Helen replied, "not just about the incident, but about the responses to it, both institutional and community. And potentially," she added, glancing toward the staircase where Lily was partially visible, "about how art and self-expression can be tools for healing and change." This caught Lily's attention. She descended a few more steps. "Art?" she asked quietly. Helen smiled. "Margaret Reynolds mentioned you're quite the artist. She showed me a drawing you'd done that's hanging in the school office, a portrait of your class that she said captured each person's essence beautifully." Lily came fully down the stairs now, her interest piqued. "I like drawing people," she admitted, "especially their hair and expressions." "Would you be willing to show me some of your work?" Helen asked. "Only if you're comfortable, of course." After a confirming nod from her father, Lily disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with her sketchbook. As she carefully turned the pages, revealing portraits, hairstyle designs, and scenes of everyday life, rendered with remarkable sensitivity for someone so young, David saw something transform in his daughter's demeanor, a quiet pride replacing the shame that had shrouded her since the incident. "These are extraordinary," Helen said, genuine admiration in her voice. "They tell stories, important ones." She looked up at David, then back to Lily. "You know, the community center is hosting a youth art exhibition next month. With your permission, I'd like to connect you with the organizer. I think your work deserves to be seen." The idea took root, growing from a simple exhibition into something more purposeful as days passed. With Helen's guidance and Margaret Reynolds' behind-the-scenes support, the concept expanded to include an educational component about cultural expression, identity, and respect for bodily autonomy, themes that emerge naturally from Lily's artistic exploration of her experience. Not everyone in the community supported the initiative. There were those who felt it unnecessarily prolonged attention to an incident best forgotten, who sent emails to the community center board questioning the political agenda of an art exhibit centered around a child's experience of discrimination. But there were others, teachers from neighboring districts, parents who recognized similar patterns in their children's schools, community elders who saw in Lily's story echoes of their own unresolved histories, who stepped forward to help, to contribute, to bear witness. 3 weeks before the exhibition was scheduled to open, David received a call from Richard Okafor, a civil rights attorney based in the nearest city. He had read Helen's preliminary article about the incident and Lily's upcoming exhibition. "What happened to your daughter represents a clear violation of her rights," Richard explained. "But more importantly, It represents an opportunity for meaningful institutional change. I'd like to offer my services, not necessarily to pursue litigation, unless that's what you want, but to help ensure that the policy reforms being discussed have real teeth. David considered the offer carefully. His initial instinct had been to protect Lily from becoming the center of a larger battle, but he also recognized that true protection meant creating systems where what happened to her couldn't happen to others. "I'd like to meet with you," he replied, "but I need to be clear, my daughter's well-being comes first. This can't become about using her story to make a point." "I completely understand," Richard assured him. "Change without care for those most affected isn't justice. It's just another form of using people. If you're finding value in this exploration of standing up for what's right while protecting those we love, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that navigate these complex human experiences." The community center's main gallery had been transformed. Soft lighting illuminated walls now covered with artwork, not just Lily's drawings, but contributions from other young artists throughout the district, all exploring themes of identity, belonging, and self-expression. In the center of the room, a collaborative installation invited visitors to add their own reflections, creating a growing tapestry of community voices. Margaret Reynolds stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals and directing them toward the refreshment table, where Elaine Carter presided over an array of homemade treats. The two women had become unlikely allies in the weeks following the school board meeting, their shared commitment to change bridging the differences in their backgrounds and approaches. "Quite a turnout," remarked Helen Garza, notepad in hand, as she surveyed the growing crowd. Her initial article had generated more response than anything she'd written in her 15 years with the local paper, leading to a follow-up series examining disciplinary disparities throughout the county's school system. "People are ready for this conversation," Margaret replied. "Maybe they always were, but no one knew how to start it." Across the room, David watched as Lily explained one of her drawings to Mrs. Winters, her elderly neighbor whose grandchildren attended a different school, but who had brought them specifically to see the exhibition. The change in his daughter over the past weeks had been subtle, but undeniable. A straightening of the shoulders, a steadiness in her voice that had been absent since the incident. Not a complete healing, but a beginning. The crowd quieted as Eleanor Walsh, the community center director, stepped to the front of the room for the official welcome. At 72, Eleanor carried the gravitas of someone who had seen her community through multiple transformations, some graceful, others painful, and had learned to facilitate change without forcing it. "Art has always been how we make sense of our experiences," Eleanor began, her voice carrying easily without the need for a microphone, "especially the difficult ones. What you see around you today is more than an exhibition. It's a conversation that began with one child's courage and has grown to include many voices." She gestured toward Lily, who stood beside her father, nervous but resolute. "I'd like to invite Lily Thompson to say a few words about her work and this exhibition." A hush fell over the gathering as Lily made her way forward. David felt his heart race with a mixture of pride and protective concern. They had practiced what she might say, but ultimately he had assured her that whatever words came or didn't come would be exactly right. Lily looked out at the faces turned toward her. She took a deep breath. "When Ms. Prescott cut my hair, I felt like I disappeared," she began, her voice small but clear. "Like the real me wasn't allowed to exist." The room was perfectly still. "Drawing helped me remember who I am," she continued. "And everyone who stood up for me helped me believe that who I am is okay, that I have the right to exist without asking permission." She gestured to the walls around them. "All these pictures show different people being themselves. I think that's what art is supposed to do, help us see each other for real." As Lily returned to her father's side, the applause that followed was warm and sustained. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling the tension begin to release from her small frame. The evening progressed with conversations flowing between exhibits, connections forming between community members who might otherwise never have crossed paths. Richard Okafor, who had driven in from the city, moved through the space with quiet attention, occasionally making notes or engaging visitors in thoughtful discussion about their responses to the artwork. Near the back of the gallery, a disturbance briefly interrupted the peaceful atmosphere. Raised voices, then a sudden silence. David looked up to see Miss Prescott standing in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and uncertainty. The crowd parted slightly, creating an uneasy corridor between the former teacher and Lily. David stepped closer to his daughter, protective instinct surging. But Lily surprised him by remaining where she stood, her gaze steady as she faced the woman who had humiliated her. Miss Prescott moved forward slowly, stopping several feet away. "I came to see for myself," she said, her voice carrying in the hushed room. What all the fuss was about. David felt Lily tense beside him, but was unprepared for what happened next. "Would you like me to show you my drawings?" Lily asked, her voice small but unwavering. Something shifted in Miss Prescott's expression. Confusion, perhaps, or the first crack in a carefully maintained certainty. "I suppose that's why I'm here," she replied, less conviction in her tone than she might have intended. What followed was unexpected. Not reconciliation or dramatic confrontation, but something more nuanced. For 15 minutes, Lily led her former teacher through the exhibition, explaining her process, the meanings behind certain pieces, the contributions from other students. Miss Prescott said little, but she listened. And in that listening, witnessed by the community gathered around them, something important was happening. Not forgiveness exactly, but a reclaiming of power. When Ms. Prescott finally left, slipping out quietly during a musical interlude, the atmosphere in the gallery subtly shifted. There was a collective exhale, as though the community had passed through some necessary trial together. Later, as people began to disperse, Margaret Reynolds found David and Lily preparing to leave. "Your daughter," she said simply, "has more courage than most adults I know." David nodded, words momentarily beyond him as he processed the events of the evening. "What happens now?" Lily asked, looking between them. It was Eleanor Walsh who answered, joining their small circle with the wisdom of decades spent nurturing community through conflict and change. "Now, dear heart," she said, "we do the quiet work of making sure tonight wasn't just a moment, but the beginning of something lasting. Have you ever witnessed art or creative expression change a conversation in your community? What was the issue? And how did creativity help people connect across differences? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire others." Winter arrived with a gentle persistence, transforming the town with a blanket of snow that muffled sounds and softened edges. 3 months had passed since the incident, and while it no longer dominated community conversation, its ripple effects continued to spread in widening circles. The school board had implemented new training requirements for all district employees, focusing on cultural competence and trauma-informed approaches to discipline. Principal Green's replacement, Dr. Amara Johnson, a veteran educator with experience in restorative justice practices, had begun the delicate work of healing a divided school community, and Richard Okafor's firm had established a small satellite office in town, offering resources and support for families navigating educational advocacy. For Lily, the changes were both external and internal. Her hair had grown out enough for new styles, which she explored with weekly visits to Elaine's salon, sessions that had evolved into informal mentoring as the older woman shared stories of her own childhood and the historical significance of black hair traditions. At school, Lily had found her circle expanding to include students from other classes, who had connected with her through the art exhibition, a diverse group united by their interest in creative expression and, increasingly, in issues of justice. David observed these transformations with a father's mixture of pride and protective concern. His leave from the FBI had been extended, a decision made easier by the consulting work he'd begun with local law enforcement, sharing investigative techniques and helping to establish more effective community engagement protocols. What had started as a temporary relocation had begun to feel like home. On a Tuesday afternoon in December, David received an unexpected call from Margaret Reynolds. "There's something I think you and Lily should know," she said, her voice carrying its usual calm efficiency, but with an undercurrent of something more. "Jason Miller has returned to school." The name immediately registered. Jason was the boy who had sat behind Lily the day Ms. Prescott cut her hair, the only student who had spoken up in the moment, his "that's not fair" ringing out before being silenced by the teacher's sharp reprimand. He had been absent since shortly after the incident, rumored to have transferred to another district. His family moved him to his grandmother's school district temporarily, Margaret explained. His mother was concerned about retaliation after he spoke up, but they've decided to return. He's in Ms. Garcia's class now, not directly with Lily, but I thought you should know he's back. After hanging up, David found himself thinking about how courage could be contagious, how one person's willingness to speak truth often emboldened others who had been silent. Jason's simple act of protest had been a catalyst in its own way, showing Lily she wasn't entirely alone in that classroom. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become a cornerstone of their new life, David mentioned Jason's return to Lily. "I remember him," she said, carefully slicing cucumbers for their salad. "He got in trouble for saying something." "He did," David confirmed. "That was brave of him." Lily considered this as she arranged the cucumber slices in a perfect pattern across the lettuce. "Maybe I should thank him," she said after a moment, "for being the only one who said something." The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following weekend, during the town's annual winter festival, David and Lily encountered Jason and his mother at the hot chocolate stand in the town square. The initial awkwardness of the meeting quickly dissolved into genuine conversation as the adults introduced themselves and the children reconnected over shared school experiences. "I want to thank you," Kayla Miller said to David as they watched their children examining an ice sculpture nearby. "Your families stand against what happened open space for a lot of overdue conversations in this town, including in our home." She explained how Jason's distress over witnessing what happened to Lily had prompted difficult but necessary discussions about justice, responsibility, and the courage to speak up. He couldn't understand why the other adults in the room didn't stop it, she said. And honestly, neither could I. Their conversation was interrupted by the children's return, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes bright with the simple joy of winter festivities. "Mom," Jason said, bouncing slightly with excitement, "they're doing the community mural project by the library. Can we go?" Lily says she's going to help paint. The community mural had been one of several initiatives that emerged from conversations started at the art exhibition, a public art project designed to celebrate the town's diversity and shared values. Led by Eleanor Walsh and a committee of local artists, the project had become a focal point for constructive community engagement. As they made their way through the festival crowd toward the library, David noticed familiar faces among the gathering. Helen Garza documenting the process for the local paper, Richard Okafor and his family adding their contributions to the design, Elaine Carter distributing hot cider to the volunteers. Margaret Reynolds stood slightly apart, observing with her characteristic quiet attention, but with a new openness in her expression. The afternoon unfolded in a collaborative spirit that seemed to represent the best of what their community could be. Not perfect unity or the absence of difference, but the willingness to create something meaningful together, despite past conflicts. Children and adults worked side by side, adding their unique contributions to a whole that was becoming more than the sum of its parts. As dusk approached and lights twinkled to life across the square, Eleanor called for everyone's attention. "Before we lose the daylight completely," she announced, "I'd like to invite our young visionary artists to explain the central panel of our mural." Lily and 3 other students stepped forward, Jason among them, along with Zoe Washington from the middle school and Miguel Sanchez from the high school art program. Each had contributed to the conceptual design that anchored the larger community contributions. Zoe spoke first, explaining how the imagery represented the town's past, its founding, its industries, its challenges. Miguel followed, highlighting elements that captured the present, the diversity of current residents, ongoing changes, areas of both progress and concern. Jason described the section representing shared values and aspirations: justice, respect, opportunity, belonging. When it was Lily's turn, she stepped forward with a confidence that made David's throat tighten with emotion. "This part," she said, pointing to a series of interconnected figures that formed the border of the entire mural, "shows how we're all connected, how what happens to one person affects everyone, even if we don't see it right away." She continued, her voice growing stronger. "After what happened to me, I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. There were people watching who cared, people who decided to speak up, even when it was scary. That's what these figures show, that we're never really alone and that standing together makes us stronger than standing apart." If you've been moved by this story of community transformation growing from one act of injustice, please subscribe. Your support helps share these important messages of solidarity and collective healing with others who need to hear them. Spring arrived in Pine Grove with its customary renewal. Crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, trees budding with cautious optimism, days stretching longer with each passing week. For Lily Thompson, now 11 years old, with a full head of healthy hair often styled in creative patterns learned from Elaine. The change of seasons brought a new milestone, her first public speaking engagement beyond the community. The invitation had come through Helen Garza, whose articles about the local response to the incident had caught the attention of a regional educational conference focused on creating more equitable school environments. The organizers had invited Lily and David to share their experience as part of a panel discussion on student dignity and bodily autonomy in schools. David had initially hesitated, concerned about exposing Lily to further scrutiny and potential criticism. But Lily, after careful consideration, had decided she wanted to participate. If it helps other kids not go through what I did, she'd reasoned, then it's worth it. They now sat in a hotel conference room filled with educators, administrators, and policymakers from across the state. David noticed Lily's hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her notes, and he leaned closer. "Remember," he whispered, "you don't have to do this. We can walk away at any point." Lily shook her head determinedly. "I'm nervous, but I'm ready." The moderator, a distinguished professor of educational equity, introduced the panel members. Dr. Johnson from Oak Ridge Elementary, Richard Okafor, now recognized for his work in educational civil rights, Eleanor Walsh representing community partnerships, and finally David and Lily Thompson. "We're especially grateful," the moderator said, "to have Lily with us today. It takes tremendous courage to share personal experiences, especially difficult ones, and even more so at her young age." When it was their turn to speak, David provided a brief overview of what had happened and the school's initial response. He then turned to Lily, giving her a reassuring nod. Lily stood, adjusted the microphone, and faced the audience. "Before everything happened," she began, "I thought teachers were always right. I thought if an adult did something that hurt you, it was probably because you deserved it somehow." The room was completely silent. "When Ms. Prescott cut my hair and said those things about my body, I felt like I had done something wrong just by existing the way I was. And when no one stopped her, it felt like everyone agreed with her." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I learned later is that sometimes adults are wrong, sometimes systems are wrong, and sometimes people stay quiet not because they agree, but because they're scared too." With remarkable clarity for someone so young, Lily outlined what had helped her heal, having her experience validated rather than minimized, seeing concrete changes in school policies, connecting with others through art and shared storytelling, and most importantly, being treated as someone whose voice and bodily autonomy mattered. "The worst part wasn't even the haircut," she concluded. "It was feeling like I didn't have the right to say no, like my body belonged to someone else to change whenever they wanted. No kid should ever feel that way, especially not at school where we're supposed to be safe." The applause that followed was sustained and emotional. Several educators wiped away tears. Others were already making notes, their expressions reflecting deep engagement with her words. During the question and answer session that followed, a middle school principal asked what advice Lily would give to educators wanting to create more respectful environments. Lily considered the question thoughtfully. "Listen to kids when we tell you something feels wrong," she said simply, "even if you don't understand why it feels wrong to us. And when other adults do something that hurts us, don't pretend it didn't happen. That hurts almost as much as what happened in the first place." As the session concluded, several attendees approached to speak with Lily and David personally. Among them was a group of student teachers, their expressions a mixture of outrage at what had happened and determination to do better in their own future classrooms. "Your daughter," one of them told David, "just changed how I think about my responsibility as a teacher. This isn't just about avoiding obvious harm, it's about actively protecting students' dignity." On the drive home, Lily was quieter than usual, gazing out the window at the greening landscape. "You doing okay?" David asked. "That was a lot," Lily nodded. "I keep thinking about something Grandma Anna used to say, about how speaking truth is like planting seeds. You don't always get to see what grows." David felt the familiar ache that accompanied memories of his late wife, but now increasingly the pain was accompanied by pride in how her wisdom lived on in their daughter. "She was right about that," he said, "and she would be so proud of the seeds you planted today." When they arrived home, a package waited on their porch, a priority mail envelope addressed to Lily. Inside was a letter from the state's Department of Education, explaining that her testimony from the educational conference had been incorporated into new guidelines for student bodily autonomy being distributed to all districts. Accompanying the letter was an advance copy of the document, which included an anonymized version of her experience as a case study. "See," David said, watching as Lily ran her fingers over the pages in wonder. "Some seeds grow faster than others. Have you ever seen a personal story create change in policies or practices? What made that story so powerful? Share your reflections in the comments. Your insights could help others understand how personal experiences can lead to broader transformation." 1 year to the day after Ms. Prescott cut Lily's hair, the Thompson living room was filled with an unlikely gathering. Margaret Reynolds sat beside Elaine Carter on the sofa, the two women now bound by a friendship that had blossomed through their shared commitment to community change. Richard Okafor occupied an armchair, legal pad balanced on his knee, as he discussed strategy with Dr. Johnson, who had proven to be exactly the kind of principal Oak Ridge Elementary needed. Helen Garza perched on a stool, recorder in hand, documenting what had become not just a local story, but a case study in community transformation. Eleanor Walsh moved between groups, her organizational skills evident in the way she facilitated connections and kept conversations productive. In the dining room, Lily and a group of student allies from across the district, including Jason Miller, who had become a close friend, worked on posters for an upcoming student-led workshop on dignity and respect. Their laughter drifted through the house, a counterpoint to the more serious conversations of the adults. David surveyed the scene from the kitchen doorway, a cup of coffee warming his hands. If someone had told him a year ago that his daughter's traumatic experience would lead to this, a coalition of committed individuals working toward lasting change, he wouldn't have believed it possible. Yet here they were, planning the launch of the Dignity Project, an initiative that would provide resources and support for students facing discrimination in schools throughout the region. The previous 6 months had brought significant developments. When the school board had attempted to quietly close the investigation into Ms. Prescott's conduct, Richard's firm had intervened, insisting on transparency and accountability. The resulting proceedings had revealed a pattern of targeted behavior towards students of color and those from lower income backgrounds, confirmatory evidence for what Margaret had documented over years. Ms. Prescott ultimately surrendered her teaching license rather than face further investigation, not the public reckoning some had hoped for, but a form of accountability nonetheless. More importantly, the process had exposed systemic failures that allowed her behavior to continue unchecked for so long, leading to district-wide reforms in how complaints were handled and documented. For Lily, the year had been one of profound growth. Her artwork had been featured in a youth exhibition at the state capitol. She had started a blog sharing her experiences and amplifying the voices of other students. Most recently, she had been invited to join a student advisory council for the state's education department, an opportunity to influence policy from within the system. As the afternoon progressed, the group moved to the backyard where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The planning session transitioned into a more casual gathering, with food and conversation flowing easily between people who might never have connected, if not for their shared commitment to change. During a quiet moment, David found himself standing with Margaret near the old oak tree that dominated the yard. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. "That first day in the principal's office, why did you step forward? You risked your job." Margaret was silent for a moment, her gaze following Lily as she showed Eleanor her newly planted garden bed. "When I was about Lily's age," she finally replied, "something similar happened to me. Not identical, but the same in all the ways that matter. An adult with power who used it to shame me, and no one who stepped in to stop it. I promised myself then that I would never be a silent bystander. But somewhere along the way I became exactly that, documenting wrongs but never quite finding the courage to confront them directly." She turned to face David fully. "What happened to Lily gave me a second chance to be the person I'd once promised to become. I should be thanking her, not the other way around." Across the yard, Eleanor called everyone together for a group photo to commemorate the official formation of the Dignity Project. As they gathered, arranging themselves beneath the oak tree, David was struck by the unlikely community that had formed from individual acts of courage, some dramatic, others quiet, but no less significant. Lily stood at the center of the group, her posture confident, her smile genuine. Her hair, now grown into a glorious halo of natural curls that she wore with pride, caught the afternoon sunlight. As Helen prepared to take the photo, Lily looked over at her father, her expression conveying what words didn't need to, that from an act of cruelty had come not just healing, but transformation, not just for her, but for an entire community. "Everyone ready?" Helen called. "Say dignity on 3. The word rose from the gathered voices in harmonious affirmation, not just of the moment being captured, but of the principle that had brought them together and would continue to guide their work ahead. Later that evening, as David and Lily sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk, Lily leaned her head against her father's shoulder. "Mum would have liked today," she said softly. "She would have loved it," David agreed. "She always believed in the power of community to heal what's broken." Lily was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think what happened to me really changed anything? Like, beyond just our town?" David considered the question carefully, respecting its importance. "I think that's how most change happens. Not all at once, but person by person, community by community. The work you've been part of this year has already touched hundreds of lives directly, and who knows how many more indirectly. Those ripples keep spreading. I still get angry sometimes," Lily admitted. "Not just about what happened, but about the fact that it happened at all, that adults could think it was okay." "That anger makes sense," David told her. "It's part of having a strong sense of justice. The question is what we do with it." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Turn it into action." "Exactly." As night settled fully around them, stars emerging in the clear spring sky, David reflected on the journey of the past year, the pain and uncertainty, but also the unexpected gifts of connection and purpose. He thought about how dignity, once violated, could not simply be restored but had to be reclaimed, often through the collective effort of many hands and hearts. In the distance, a car pulled into the driveway of a house down the street. A woman emerged. Ms. Miller, Jason's mother, now the newly elected president of the school board. Her campaign had focused on transparency and equity, values that might have seemed controversial in Pine Grove not long ago, but had found surprising resonance in a community awakened to its own capacity for change. If this story of transformation, healing, and community action resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Your support helps bring more stories of positive change to light, showing that even in the face of injustice, dignity and collective action can create lasting impact. 2 years after the incident that had changed her life, Lily Thompson stood at the podium in the Oak Ridge Elementary Gymnasium, addressing the incoming 5th grade class during their orientation. At 13, she now attended the middle school across town, but she had been invited back to speak as part of the school's transformed approach to student empowerment and community building. The gymnasium looked different than it had during her time at Oak Ridge. Walls now adorned with student artwork celebrating diversity, banners proclaiming core values like dignity, respect, and belonging. Dr. Johnson sat nearby, along with the new school counselor specifically hired to support trauma-informed practices. "When I was sitting where you are now," Lily began, her voice clear and confident, "I didn't know that I had rights in school. I didn't know that my body belonged to me and only me. I didn't know that if something felt wrong, I could say so and should be heard." She paused, looking out at the sea of attentive young faces. "Now, you will know these things from your very first day. You'll know because it's written in your student handbook. You'll know because your teachers have been trained to respect your boundaries. You'll know because older students like me will keep reminding you." As Lily continued her presentation, introducing the peer advocacy program that would pair older students with 5th graders throughout the year, David watched from the back of the room. Beside him stood Richard Okafor, whose firm had helped establish the program as part of a restorative approach to the harm that had occurred at Oak Ridge. "Your daughter," Richard commented quietly, "has found her calling early." David nodded, emotion tightening his throat as he watched Lily lead the younger students through an interactive exercise about personal boundaries and mutual respect. The transformation he had witnessed in her over the past 2 years went beyond healing. She had discovered a sense of purpose that informed everything from her academic focus to her extracurricular activities. After the orientation, as students and parents mingled in the school courtyard, David noticed a woman standing slightly apart from the crowd, observing the proceedings with an unreadable expression. It took him a moment to recognize her, Diane Prescott, her appearance subtly altered by the passage of time and what appeared to be significant weight loss. Their eyes met across the space, and after a moment's hesitation she approached. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice lacking the defensive edge he remembered. "I wasn't sure if I should come today." David studied her carefully, noting the tension in her posture, the way her hands clasped and unclasped nervously. "What brought you here?" he asked, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "I've been doing a lot of work," she replied. "Therapy, cultural competency training, a lot of difficult self-examination. Part of that work involves acknowledging harm done." She glanced toward where Lily stood, surrounded by admiring fifth graders. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I would deserve it. But I wanted you to know that what happened, what I did, has forced me to confront patterns I didn't want to see in myself, and that your daughter's courage has had an impact far beyond what you might realize." Before David could respond, Lily noticed the interaction and made her way over. There was a moment of profound silence as the three stood together, the weight of shared history palpable between them. "Ms. Prescott," Lily said finally, her tone neither cold nor warm, simply measured. "I didn't expect to see you here. I came to listen," Ms. Prescott replied, "and to see what's grown in my absence." Lily considered this, her expression thoughtful. "A lot has changed," she said. "Not just rules and policies, the way people think about things." Ms. Prescott nodded. "I can see that. It's good to see." Another silence stretched between them, not comfortable, but not entirely hostile either. Finally, Ms. Prescott spoke again. "I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, truly sorry, for what I did and for the harm it caused, not just to you personally, but to the trust between students and teachers that's supposed to be sacred." Lily's response, when it came, carried the wisdom of someone who had thought deeply about reconciliation and its complexities. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you yet, but I'm glad that something good could come from what happened, even for you." As Ms. Prescott walked away, David placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You okay?" Lily nodded slowly. "Yeah. It's weird, but seeing her didn't make me feel scared or angry like I thought it might. It just made me realize how much stronger I am now." Later that evening, the extended community that had formed around their experience gathered at Elaine's salon for what had become an annual tradition, a celebration of progress and renewal. The space had expanded over the past year, now including a community room where youth mentoring programs and cultural education workshops were regularly held. Margaret Reynolds, recently retired from her position at Oak Ridge but more active than ever in community advocacy, raised a glass in toast. "To 2 years of hard-won progress," she said, "and to the young woman who catalyzed it all." Glasses clinked as the group, now including several teachers from various schools, parents who had become advocates, students who had found their voices through the Dignity Project, echoed the sentiment. Lily, though still young, had earned her place as an equal in this circle of changemakers. As the evening progressed, Helen Garza shared news that her series on educational equity had been recognized with a regional journalism award. Eleanor Walsh announced expanded funding for the Community Arts Center's youth programming. Richard updated everyone on legislative progress towards statewide protections for student bodily autonomy. David observed it all with a sense of wonder at how tragedy could, with the right support and commitment, transform into triumph. The case had made headlines briefly, but the real story was in what had happened afterward. The steady, unglamorous work of changing systems and hearts, one conversation and policy at a time. When it was Lily's turn to speak, she stood with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. 2 years ago, I just wanted everything to go back to normal, she said. I didn't understand yet that normal wasn't good enough. Not for me, not for other kids who weren't being treated with dignity. She looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes in turn. What I'm most proud of isn't the changes we've made in rules or policies. It's how we've changed the questions people ask. Instead of, why is this child causing problems? People are starting to ask, what does this child need to thrive? That's the difference between blame and dignity. As murmurs of agreement circled the room, David reflected on how his daughter's words captured exactly what had shifted in their community. A fundamental reorientation towards seeing children as bearers of inherent dignity rather than projects to be controlled or corrected. The gathering continued late into the evening, plans being made for the year ahead, relationships deepening through shared purpose. When David and Lily finally headed home, the moon was high above them, casting long shadows across the familiar streets of what had become, somewhat unexpectedly, their permanent home. "Dad," Lily said as they turned onto their street, "remember when you told me that standing up for what's right sometimes comes with a cost?" "I do," he replied. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she continued. "And I think maybe it works the other way too. Not standing up also comes with a cost, maybe a bigger one because it's not just paid once. It gets paid over and over by everyone who gets hurt because nobody said, 'Stop.'" David looked at his daughter, no longer the frightened child who had come home with mutilated hair and a shattered sense of self, but a young person with deep moral clarity and the courage to live by it. "That's wisdom beyond your years," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mom would be amazed by who you're becoming." Lily smiled in the moonlight. "I think she knows. Have you ever witnessed how standing up against one injustice can inspire broader change in a community? What ripple effects did you observe from that initial act of courage? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. The Dignity Project's third annual community forum filled the Pine Grove High School auditorium to capacity. What had begun as a local initiative focused specifically on bodily autonomy in schools had evolved into a regional model for student empowerment and institutional accountability across multiple issues affecting young people. David Thompson, now serving as the project's executive director after formally retiring from the FBI, stood backstage with Margaret Reynolds and Richard Okafor, watching as community members of all ages filtered into the auditorium. What struck him most was the diversity of the gathering, not just racial and ethnic diversity, though that had increased significantly in their small town over the past 3 years, but diversity of age, background, and perspective. "Remember our first meeting?" Margaret asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 7 people around your dining room table trying to figure out what to do next." David nodded, returning her smile. "Never would have predicted this," he admitted, gesturing toward the filled seats. "But then I've learned to stop underestimating what determined people can accomplish together." On stage, 15-year-old Lily was in deep conversation with the forum's keynote speaker, Dr. Maya Collins, a nationally recognized expert on trauma-informed educational practices whose research had been instrumental in developing the framework now implemented across their district. The easy confidence with which Lily engaged with the distinguished academic highlighted how far she had come from the shattered child of 3 years earlier. The forum opened with a student-led presentation on the year's accomplishments, policy changes in 12 school districts, a peer advocacy program serving over 500 students, trauma-informed training delivered to more than 300 educators, and most recently, the launch of a state-level youth advisory council on educational equity. The student presenters, ranging from elementary to high school age, spoke with remarkable clarity about complex issues of power, accountability, and systemic change. When it was Lily's turn to introduce Dr. Collins, she approached the podium with the poised presence that had become her signature. Her hair, worn in a series of intricate twists that Elaine had helped her create for the occasion, caught the stage lights as she moved. 3 years ago, she began, a teacher cut my hair without permission, telling me my body wasn't right for the style I had chosen. What happened next taught me something critical about injustice. It thrives when we believe we're facing it alone. She gestured toward the filled auditorium. Look around you. None of us is alone in facing the systems that need changing. And when we stand together, young and old from all backgrounds and experiences, those systems begin to shift. As the evening progressed through Dr. Collins's keynote address and the community dialogue that followed, David observed the natural leadership that had emerged among the young people involved in the project. Lily was still central, but no longer solely so. Other student leaders had found their voices and their particular areas of focus within the larger mission. The forum concluded with an announcement that brought the audience to their feet. The Dignity Project had been awarded a significant grant to develop their model as a replicable program for communities nationwide. Lily, along with 2 other student leaders, would serve as youth consultants in the expansion process, ensuring that young people's perspectives remained at the center of the work. As the auditorium slowly emptied, groups lingering to continue conversations sparked during the forum, Helen Garza approached David with her recorder in hand. 3 years in, what do you see as the most significant change that's come from all this? She asked, her journalistic instincts still sharp, though she had recently transitioned to teaching at the local community college. David considered the question carefully. It would be easy to point to policy changes or new programs, he replied. Those are measurable, tangible outcomes. But I think the most profound change has been in how this community understands its responsibility toward its young people, not as objects to be managed or molded, but as full human beings deserving of voice and dignity. And personally, Helen pressed, for you and Lily? David's gaze found his daughter across the room, where she was deep in conversation with Dr. Collins and several other students. For Lily, I think this journey has transformed trauma into purpose. She's discovered that her voice matters, not just in standing up for herself, but in creating space for others to be heard. He paused, emotions rising unexpectedly as he continued. For me, it's been about learning that justice isn't always what I thought it was when I carried a badge. Sometimes it's not about punishment, or even formal accountability. Sometimes it's about transformation, creating communities where harm is less likely to occur in the first place, because we've changed the underlying conditions that allowed it. Later that night, as the last of the forum's cleanup crew dispersed and the auditorium lights dimmed, David and Lily walked together across the empty school parking lot. The spring air carried the scent of new growth and possibility. I'm proud of you, Dad, Lily said suddenly, linking her arm through his, for helping turn what happened to me into something bigger than just our family. David felt his heart swell with love and pride. I should be saying that to you, he replied. Your courage started all of this. Lily shook her head. It wasn't just my courage. It was Margaret speaking up that first day. It was Elaine sharing her wisdom. It was everyone who decided that what happened mattered enough to change how things work. As they reached their car, they both looked back at the school building silhouetted against the night sky. No longer just a place of learning, but a symbol of what community commitment to dignity could achieve. You know what Mom used to say, Lily said softly. Justice isn't something you find. It's something you make together day by day. David wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, recognizing Anna's wisdom in their child's words and in the work of the past 3 years. She was right about that, he said, as usual. If this story of transformation from personal injustice to community-wide change has inspired you, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that remind us how collective action can create lasting positive impact in our world. The gentle June breeze carried the sound of pomp and circumstance across the high school football field, where rows of graduates sat in their caps and gowns, faces turned expectantly toward the podium. Among them, Lily Thompson's expression held the particular mix of nostalgia and anticipation unique to moments of significant transition. 5 years had passed since the day that had altered her life's trajectory. 5 years of growth, challenge, learning, and unexpected leadership. Now 18, and headed to Georgetown University in the fall on a prestigious social justice scholarship, Lily found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this threshold. David watched from the audience, where he sat between Eleanor Walsh and Margaret Reynolds, both now considered family after years of shared purpose. Nearby sat Elaine Carter, whose salon had evolved into a community hub for intergenerational mentoring, and Helen Garza, whose documentation of their story had become a case study used in journalism schools nationwide. Richard Okafor had driven in from the city where his firm's expanded educational advocacy division now operated, bringing with him several colleagues who had worked with Lily on policy initiatives over the years. They were all there to witness not just Lily's graduation, but her address as valedictorian, an honor earned through academic excellence, but also through the wisdom and compassion she had developed through her activism. When her name was called, Lily approached the podium with measured steps. The sunlight caught the intricate beading Elaine had woven into her braids for the occasion, a crown of sorts, symbolizing not just academic achievement, but the reclaiming of dignity that had defined her adolescence. 5 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady, something happened that made me question my worth and my place in the world. Many of you know the story, how a teacher cut my hair without permission, telling me my body wasn't right for the style I had chosen. She paused, surveying the gathered faces, her classmates, their families, the educators and community members who had been part of her journey. What you might not know is how that moment of injustice became a turning point, not just for me, but for our entire community. Today, I want to talk about what I've learned about transformation, how pain can become purpose when we refuse to face it alone. With eloquence beyond her years, Lily traced the evolution of her understanding, from personal hurt to systemic awareness, from individual healing to collective action. She spoke of the intergenerational partnerships that had sustained their work, the policy changes that had expanded protections for students throughout the state, and the cultural shift that had made dignity a centerpiece of their educational approach. The most important lesson I've learned, she continued, is that justice isn't a destination we arrive at once and for all. It's a practice, something we commit to recreating every day through our choices, our policies, and the ways we treat each other. As Lily's address drew to a close, she acknowledged the mentors who had guided her journey, calling out Eleanor, Margaret, Elaine, Helen, and Richard by name, before turning her attention to her father. "And to my dad," she said, emotion finally catching in her voice, "who showed me that the quietest forms of courage are often the most powerful, who taught me that justice sometimes comes not through dramatic confrontation, but through steady presence and unwavering commitment to truth. Thank you for helping me find strength I didn't know I had." There wasn't a dry eye in David's Row as Lily concluded her address with a call to her fellow graduates to carry forward the work of creating communities where dignity was not a privilege but a right, for children, for marginalized groups, for all whose voices had been historically silenced. The celebration that followed at the Thompson home brought together the extended community that had formed around their journey. The backyard was filled with graduates and their families, educators from schools throughout the district, advocates who had become allies, and neighbors who had witnessed the transformation of their town. As twilight descended and fairy lights twinkled in the oak tree that had watched over so many milestones, David found a moment alone with his daughter near the garden she had planted years earlier, now a thriving space of color and life. "Your mom would be bursting with pride today," he said, his voice soft with emotion, "not just because of your achievements, but because of who you've become, your character, your compassion, your commitment to making things better for others." Lily leaned her head against her father's shoulder, a gesture that had remained constant even as she had grown from child to young woman. "I feel her with us," she said simply. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the gathering, the unlikely community that had formed from crisis and commitment. "You know," Lily said finally, "when I was writing my speech, I kept thinking about something Ms. Elaine told me years ago, about how what happened wasn't about my hair being wrong, but about someone else's heart being wrong." David nodded, remembering the salon visit that had marked the beginning of Lily's healing. "I think I understand it differently now," she continued. "It wasn't just about one person's heart. It was about a whole system that made it possible for that person to act that way and expect no consequences. That's what we've been changing all these years. Not just policies, but hearts and expectations." Before David could respond, they were joined by Jason Miller, now headed to a state university on a teaching scholarship, his own journey inseparable from the movement that had started with his simple protest in that fifth-grade classroom. "The Social Action Committee wanted me to remind you about the meeting next Tuesday," he told Lily. "We're finalizing the transition plan for next year's leadership." Lily nodded. "I'll be there. I want to make sure everything's in place before I leave for Georgetown." As Jason rejoined the celebration, David marveled at the infrastructure of youth leadership they had built, ensuring that the work would continue long after its original catalyst had moved on to new challenges. "Are you nervous," he asked, "about leaving all this behind?" Lily considered the question thoughtfully. "Not nervous, exactly. I know the work is in good hands. And I'm excited to learn new approaches, connect with people doing similar work in other places." She smiled. "Besides, it's not like I'm disappearing. I'll be back for board meetings and strategy sessions. And holidays," David added with a smile. "Don't forget those." "And holidays," she agreed, linking her arm through his. "Always those." As they rejoined the gathering, accepting congratulations and sharing memories, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun in trauma and isolation had blossomed into purpose and community. The justice they had sought had not come through vengeance or even through conventional accountability, but through transformation of systems, of relationships, and of their own understanding of what healing truly meant. Later that night, as the last guests departed and the house grew quiet, David found a small package on his pillow, a graduation gift from Lily. Inside was a simple silver compass, its face intricately engraved. The note accompanying it read, "Dad, you've been my true north through everything. Thank you for showing me that justice isn't just about fighting what's wrong, but about building what's right. With all my love, Lily." David held the compass in his palm, feeling its weight and significance. From the profoundly unjust act that had once threatened to diminish his daughter, had come a journey of restoration and growth that had expanded her and their entire community in ways he could never have imagined. Outside, the stars shone bright above their home, bearing witness to the quiet truth they had discovered together. That dignity, once claimed and shared, could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And that justice at its heart was not a matter of punishment, but of restoration, rebuilding what was broken into something stronger, more inclusive, and ultimately more whole. Have you witnessed or been part of a journey where personal pain was transformed into positive change for others? What did that transformation teach you about justice, healing, or community? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be just what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for watching this powerful journey of transformation and justice. If you found value in Lily and David's story, please click on the video appearing on your screen now for an even more incredible tale of courage that will inspire you to stand up for what's right in your own community. Your next discovery awaits. Don't miss it.